At the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in California, Commander Blake "Hammer" Morrison wasn't just there to oversee routine training that day. When he told Chuck Norris that movie fighting has nothing to do with real combat, he would learn which battle was truly real. The Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California, stood as the most unforgiving crucible in American military training. Behind its chain-link fences and concrete barriers, the world's most elite warriors were forged through trials that broke lesser men and revealed the true nature of those who survived. The Pacific Ocean crashed against the nearby shores with relentless rhythm, a constant reminder that nature, like warfare, showed no mercy to the unprepared. Commander Blake "Hammer" Morrison surveyed the training compound with the practiced eye of someone who had earned his authority through blood, sweat, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that few could comprehend. At 38 years old, he stood 6 feet 2 inches with the lean, powerful build of a man who had spent 2 decades pushing his body and mind to their absolute limits. His weathered face bore the subtle scars of combat operations across 3 different theaters of war, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing as they tracked the movement of trainees struggling through another day of what many considered the most demanding military preparation on Earth. Blake had earned his nickname Hammer not through brutality, but through the relentless precision with which he applied pressure to break down civilian thinking and rebuild it into the warrior mindset that defined naval special warfare. His approach to training was legendary throughout the special operations community, methodical, uncompromising, and absolutely effective at producing fighters who could survive and succeed in the most hostile environments imaginable. Real combat isn't about looking good, Blake would tell his trainees during their darkest moments of training. It's about surviving when everything goes wrong, when you're outgunned, outnumbered, and the only thing standing between you and death is your training, your brothers, and your ability to think clearly under pressure that would crush ordinary men. This philosophy had served Blake extraordinarily well throughout his career. As an enlisted SEAL, he had participated in over 40 combat missions across Afghanistan, Iraq, and several classified operations that existed only in redacted files. His transition to officer rank had been inevitable. His tactical intelligence, leadership under fire, and absolute dedication to his men had marked him as someone destined for command responsibility. But Blake's true genius had revealed itself in his role as a training commander. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify the psychological breaking points that separated those who would succeed in special operations from those who would become liabilities to their teams. His training programs had been studied and replicated throughout the special warfare community, and his graduates had earned reputations as some of the most effective operators in American military history. The training center where Blake commanded reflected his exacting standard. Every piece of equipment was maintained to perfection, every drill was executed with precision that bordered on the obsessive, and every trainee understood that mediocrity was not just discouraged, it was potentially fatal in the environments where they would eventually operate. In real combat, Blake would explain to visiting officials and civilian contractors, "There are no second takes, no special effects, no choreographed sequences. There is only the brutal reality of violence applied with maximum efficiency against an enemy who wants to kill you and everyone you're sworn to protect." This perspective had created in Blake a deep skepticism toward anything that resembled performance rather than authentic preparation for combat. Hollywood's portrayal of military operations particularly irritated him. The unrealistic tactics, the glorification of individual heroics over team coordination, and the fundamental misunderstanding of what real warfare actually required from those who practiced it professionally. Movies teach people to think combat looks like a ballet, Blake would say whenever the topic arose. Real fighting is ugly, desperate, and requires skills that can't be learned from watching screens or practicing choreography. That Tuesday morning, the training center was hosting a special program about leadership development and mental resilience, featuring speakers who would address the psychological aspects of elite performance under stress. The event had drawn participants from throughout the special operations community, all eager to learn from experts who understood the unique challenges of preparing warriors for environments where failure meant death. Among the invited speakers was Chuck Norris, who had been asked to discuss the mental discipline required for sustained excellence in high-pressure environments. Chuck's invitation had come through channels that Blake didn't fully understand. Apparently, his reputation extended beyond Hollywood into circles that appreciated his competitive martial arts background and his work with law enforcement training programs. Chuck arrived at the training center dressed in simple khaki pants and a navy blue polo shirt, his presence immediately recognizable but characteristically understated. At 73 years old, he moved through the military environment with obvious respect for its protocols and traditions, pausing to acknowledge guards with proper courtesy and displaying the kind of institutional awareness that suggested familiarity with formal military culture. Accompanying Chuck were Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a sports psychologist who specialized in elite performance training, and retired Colonel James Patterson, a former special operations officer who now worked as a consultant for advanced tactical training programs. They had come to the seminar as part of a broader research project about how competitive martial arts principles could be applied to military training methodologies. Mr. Norris, Dr. Mitchell explained as they were escorted through the facility, "We're particularly interested in your perspective on how mental preparation in competitive fighting translates to other high-stress environments." Chuck nodded thoughtfully, his eyes taking in the training equipment and facility design with obvious appreciation. "Competition teaches you to perform when everything depends on not making mistakes. The pressure is different from what these men face, but the mental discipline required is probably similar." Blake had been observing Chuck's arrival from across the compound, his assessment shaped by assumptions that reflected his deep skepticism towards civilian involvement in military training. Here was someone whose primary claim to expertise came from entertainment rather than authentic combat experience, someone who had achieved fame through choreographed performances rather than proven effectiveness in real warfare. "Another Hollywood consultant trying to teach warriors," Blake muttered to Master Chief Rodriguez, his senior enlisted advisor. "What's next? Asking stunt coordinators to design combat tactics?" Master Chief Rodriguez, a veteran of over 20 years in special operations, glanced at Blake with the careful expression of someone who had learned to navigate the sometimes complex relationship between officers and their experienced NCOs. "Sir, his background shows some serious competitive achievements before the movie career. Might be worth hearing what he has to say." Blake's response reflected his fundamental belief that civilian achievement, regardless of its nature, had limited relevance to military preparation. Competition is performance. Combat is survival. They're completely different skill sets, and confusing them gets people killed. As the morning's formal presentations began, Blake listened with professional attention to the other speakers, taking notes and asking technical questions that demonstrated both his genuine interest in improving training methods and his sophisticated understanding of how mental preparation affected operational effectiveness. His own presentation, when it came, was a masterclass in practical application of psychological principles to real-world combat scenarios. Chuck had been observing Blake throughout the morning with growing respect for his obvious competence and dedication to his profession. The commander's presentation revealed someone who understood not just the technical aspects of warfare, but the deeper psychological and ethical challenges that defined elite military service. During the question and answer period that followed Chuck's presentation about mental discipline under pressure, Blake raised his hand with the kind of professional courtesy that characterized all his interactions but concealed sharp skepticism about civilian expertise in military-related topics. "Mr. Norris," Blake said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to being heard with respect in professional settings, "I appreciate your insights about mental preparation in competitive environments. However, I'm curious about how you reconcile competitive fighting experience with the realities of actual combat operations." Chuck nodded encouragingly, recognizing the underlying challenge in the question. "That's an excellent point, Commander. I think there are certainly fundamental differences between competition and real combat situations. The difference," Blake continued, his tone maintaining professional courtesy while making his position clear, "is that competitive fighting operates under controlled conditions with rules, referees, and safety protocols. Combat operations involve life-and-death decisions in chaotic environments where the enemy doesn't follow any rules except survival." The question hung in the air with obvious challenge, though Blake's tone remained scrupulously professional. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward with interest, recognizing that this exchange might reveal something important about how military professionals viewed civilian contributions to their training methodologies. Chuck considered the question carefully before responding. "You're absolutely right about the fundamental differences, Commander. Competition can teach mental discipline and physical technique, but it can't replicate the psychological pressure of knowing that people's lives depend on your decisions." Blake's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes showed that Chuck's answer hadn't fully addressed his concerns about the relevance of civilian experience to military training. "Given those limitations, how do you see competitive martial arts contributing to preparation for real combat operations?" "I think the value is probably indirect," Chuck replied with genuine respect for Blake's expertise. "Competition teaches you to perform under pressure and to maintain focus when everything is at stake. Those mental skills might transfer to other high-stress environments, but you're right that the specific applications are very different." Blake nodded politely, but his body language suggested that he remained unconvinced by what he viewed as an attempt to draw connections between essentially different domains of human performance. As the formal presentations concluded and the event moved into informal discussion and demonstration periods, he found himself increasingly bothered by what he saw as the group's uncritical acceptance of Chuck's perspectives on mental preparation. During a break in the proceedings, Blake approached Chuck with the kind of respectful formality that military culture demanded, but with an underlying agenda that went beyond simple professional courtesy. "Mr. Norris," he said, maintaining proper military bearing, "I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I'd be very interested in seeing how competitive fighting techniques translate to realistic combat scenarios. Perhaps you'd be willing to participate in a demonstration." Chuck's expression showed neither surprise nor defensiveness at what was clearly a challenge disguised as a professional request. "I'd be happy to participate in any way that would be helpful to the group." "Excellent," Blake said, his tone maintaining perfect military courtesy while his eyes revealed satisfaction at having created an opportunity to demonstrate the limitations of civilian martial arts training in military contexts. "Perhaps we could explore some basic principles of close-quarters combat. I'm always interested in seeing how different training approaches handle realistic engagement scenarios." Dr. Mitchell immediately recognized the significance of what was developing and discreetly signaled Colonel Patterson to begin documenting the interaction. This kind of spontaneous exchange between military professionals and civilian experts was exactly the type of encounter their research was designed to analyze. Within minutes, a section of the training facility had been cleared and the seminar participants had gathered to observe what promised to be an illuminating demonstration of how different approaches to combat training might interact in practical application. Blake prepared for the demonstration with military precision, removing his uniform shirt to reveal the lean, muscled physique of someone who maintained peak physical conditioning as a professional requirement. His movements were economical and purposeful, each gesture reflecting the kind of tactical awareness that came from years of training in environments where carelessness could be fatal. Chuck's preparation was markedly different. He simply removed his polo shirt and stood quietly in the center of the designated area, doing gentle stretching movements that looked more like meditation than athletic preparation. At 73, he no longer possessed the explosive athleticism of his competitive prime, but his presence suggested a different kind of readiness, not the coiled tension of a warrior preparing for battle, but the settled confidence of someone who understood exactly what he was capable of doing. "What would you like to explore?" Chuck asked, his tone indicating genuine interest in learning something from the exchange rather than proving anything about his own capabilities. Blake's response revealed the depth of his confidence in military close-quarters combat methodology. "Let's begin with basic engagement principles. Realistic scenarios where rules don't apply and the objective is neutralizing a threat as quickly and efficiently as possible." "Sounds good," Chuck agreed. "I should mention that I haven't practiced military tactics, so you'll probably need to adjust for civilian limitations." Blake moved into a combat stance that demonstrated textbook form refined through years of training in realistic scenarios. His positioning was perfect for the kind of close-quarters engagement that special operations personnel encountered in urban combat environments, and his mental preparation was obvious in his focused attention to tactical variables. "Please engage as you would in a realistic threat scenario," Blake said, his confidence in military training methodology absolute. "I'll demonstrate how proper combat preparation handles civilian fighting techniques." Chuck approached with respectful caution, engaging with Blake in what appeared to be a straightforward demonstration of close-quarters combat principles. Blake immediately applied one of his most refined techniques, a combination of striking and grappling designed to neutralize threats quickly and efficiently in realistic combat situations. But something unexpected happened. As Blake committed to techniques that had proven effective in actual combat operations, Chuck seemed to simply disappear from the engagement, not through dramatic movement or athletic escape, but through positioning and timing so subtle that Blake found himself applying perfect military technique against empty space while Chuck remained standing beside him, apparently unaffected by techniques that had been tested in real combat. "Interesting," Blake said, his confidence momentarily shaken but his determination intensified. "Let me try a different approach." This time, Blake employed more sophisticated tactics, using principles of combat engagement that reflected advanced military training in realistic threat scenarios. His technique was flawless, exactly as it had been taught by the most experienced combat instructors in the special operations community, refined through actual operational experience. Again, Chuck seemed to neutralize Blake's approach not through superior military technique or dramatic counter-tactics, but through positioning and timing so subtle that most observers missed exactly what had happened. Blake's perfect military training found nothing to work against, leaving him extended and temporarily off balance while Chuck remained in perfect equilibrium. For the third attempt, Blake abandoned his teaching mode and began applying techniques with the intensity that characterized actual combat operations. He employed a rapid series of military combat methods, each one proven effective in real warfare, each one flowing smoothly into the next according to tactical patterns that represented decades of refined military thinking about close-quarters combat. Chuck responded to this increased intensity not with matching aggression or military countertactics, but with what appeared to be effortless adaptation. He seemed to read Blake's intentions before they were fully formed, responding to attacks that hadn't quite been launched yet and maintaining perfect balance regardless of what proven combat techniques were being applied against him. After several minutes of this increasingly one-sided exchange, Blake stopped, breathing harder than someone of his conditioning should have been after what appeared to be a relatively controlled demonstration. "I don't understand," he said, his voice carrying genuine confusion rather than defensiveness. "Your technique, it doesn't follow military tactical patterns, doesn't use proven combat methods." But somehow, Chuck's expression showed only respectful attention, no trace of triumph or condescension. "Your combat training is genuinely excellent, Commander. Your technique is textbook perfect, and your tactical understanding is obvious." "Then how?" "You're applying military combat principles exactly as they were taught to you," Chuck explained patiently. "But you're applying them against an opponent you expected to encounter in military scenarios, not the person who was actually standing in front of you." Blake looked confused, so Chuck continued. "Military training teaches perfect tactics for combat against enemies who fight according to recognizable patterns. But when you encounter someone who moves according to different principles, those specific applications become less effective." The insight hit Blake like a revelation. For all his tactical sophistication, for all his understanding of proven combat methodology, he had been fighting according to predetermined military patterns rather than adapting to the actual situation that confronted him. "But military tactics," Blake began. "Military tactics are excellent for military situations," Chuck agreed. "But effective combat requires adapting core principles to whatever circumstances actually present themselves, rather than expecting every situation to conform to standard tactical scenarios." Colonel Patterson stepped forward, recognizing that the demonstration had revealed something profound about the relationship between systematic training and adaptive application. "What we've just witnessed," he said carefully, "illustrates something fundamental about the nature of combat effectiveness. Both approaches have value, but real mastery requires understanding principles rather than just memorizing application." Blake stood in the center of the training area, his worldview undergoing the kind of fundamental reassessment that only comes from encountering something that challenges everything you thought you knew. For years, he had equated military tactical perfection with combat mastery, believing that proven battlefield techniques represented the pinnacle of fighting effectiveness. "I think," Blake said slowly, "I've been an excellent student of military combat tactics, but perhaps not such a good student of fighting principles." Chuck's response showed the kind of wisdom that could only come from decades of learning across multiple disciplines and environments. Military training provides incredibly sophisticated tools for understanding tactical applications. But the goal isn't to replace proven methods, it's to understand the principles behind them well enough that you can apply them to any situation. As the demonstration concluded and the facility began to return to normal operations, Blake approached Chuck with a request that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of the day. "Mr. Norris," he said, employing respectful civilian address rather than military formality, "would you be willing to work with our training program? Not to change our military methods, but to help us understand how to apply tactical principles more adaptively." Chuck's response exemplified the humility that had characterized his entire approach to the interaction. "I think I could learn as much from your program as I could contribute. Your tactical foundation is incredibly solid, probably more sophisticated than anything I learned in competition. But maybe together we can explore how systematic training and adaptive application can strengthen each other." In the months that followed, the Naval Special Warfare Training Center quietly incorporated elements of adaptive tactical thinking into its curriculum. Blake maintained all the technical precision and proven methodology that had made his program legendary, but he began approaching military tactics as expressions of underlying principles rather than rigid applications. His graduates' operational effectiveness improved measurably as they learned to apply proven military methods more flexibly in unpredictable combat environments. More importantly, Blake's understanding of combat preparation evolved to include not just technical proficiency but adaptive thinking under pressure. The documentation from that day's demonstration became a case study in advanced military training programs throughout the special operations community, not because it showed civilian methods defeating military tactics, but because it demonstrated how deep understanding could transcend apparent contradictions between different approaches to combat preparation. A year later, when Blake was selected for promotion to a senior training command, he dedicated the advancement to what he called the day I learned the difference between knowing tactics and understanding combat. Chuck characteristically deflected credit for Blake's professional growth. He already had everything everything he needed. Chuck told Dr. Mitchell when she asked about the transformation she had witnessed. Sometimes we just need someone to help us see what we already know. And sometimes the most profound lessons come not from learning new techniques, but from discovering that expertise in one domain doesn't automatically transfer to mastery in all domains, and that true warriors recognize wisdom regardless of where it originates.